Hi, and welcome to Season 2 of the Team Deakins Podcast, a collection of informal conversations between Roger and James Deakins and a guest. We never know where the conversation will take us, so listen in and see where it goes. This episode is sponsored by Aperture and its new Storm XT52, the industry's most powerful LED point source light. Brighter than a 6K HMI and powered by Aperture's revolutionary Blair light engine, the Storm XT52 is both a tunable white light and also the brightest ever adjustable color LED. Storm XT52, unrivaled output, only from Aperture. Today, we're speaking with a production designer who began as an art director. His credits include In Bruges, Dark Shadows, Skyfall, and Star Wars: The Last Jedi. We're pleased to welcome Chris Lowe. Chris, thank you for doing this.
It's an absolute pleasure.
Happy to see you.
No, it's a wonderful thing to do, and I've just so enjoyed listening to the vast majority of your podcasts already. So I was wondering if it would ever come about until a very chance meeting on the seafront in Devon with Roger a few weeks ago.
So unexpected, yeah. It's crazy. Anyway, it was glad to remind us, actually, we should speak to you.
Yeah.
Because you've had such a sort of storied career. You've worked with so many great designers as an art director, and now you're production designer yourself. So, yeah.
So, well, let's start with our normal question, which is, how did you get to where you are today? As a kid, were you redesigning furniture? Were you trying to redo your surroundings? Was it something you knew you wanted to do, or did you decide to become a dentist and then find it? What's your story?
If only it was that romantic. No, I mean, I suppose it's funny. As I say, I've heard a lot of your podcasts, and the interesting thing about people that are in the creative industries is no one seems to have a plan, really. And, I grew up, my family, my dad worked as a manager in a cash and carry and was a very big people person, a sweet man, an absolute delightful guy. And my mum was obviously a stay-at-home housewife, but was a shorthand typist in an earlier career for HMRC in the north of England, and was very creative. Mum could knit and bake and do all the things that she needed to do. And Dad was actually pretty good at drawing as well, but the whole family were creative. And the only thing I could really do at school properly was draw. And that was the only thing I was obsessed about doing. I wasn't that good at maths or sciences, and went to a really good secondary school, but didn't excel in it, but could do art and design and could do craft design technology. And then I didn't do too well in the exams at the end. I got let down and was told I was going to get a grade 1, and I didn't. I got like a grade 4, which was a terrible mistake. And they even admitted it, but they only gave me a grade 2 to sort of correct it. So I ended up staying a year behind, and I went on to another college and studied a year of general art and design, and then did a 2-year course, which was a BTEC course, technically, studying graphics and ceramics. And it was at that point, there was a lady there called Mrs. Simpson, and she kind of just snapped my HB pencils in two and said, "This is not how you draw. This is how you should be drawing." And she just became this kind of mentor lady who was just very firm, but also very fair, taught me how to draw, and we did life drawing. And I had 3 excellent years there, really learning how to draw properly, really, and draw with 90% observation and 10% sort of actual technical drawing. So I love that. And because I was a year behind, a good friend of mine had left college already and gone on to university, and he wrote back to me and said, "You might like this course because there's a 3D design module, and in it there's a film and TV design module, and it's kind of really cool." So I went to see him at Suffolk, and I had a day there where they let me in on the lessons, and I met a few of the tutors, and they said, "Look, why don't you apply next year?" So that's what I did. And I got on, and I did the course there for 2 years. And again, I met another ex-BBC designer called Jeff Patterson, and he was, again, only had time for people that really wanted to draw and really wanted to make an effort. And I really did want to make an effort because I was the first kid out of Lancashire, and my parents were paying for my education. So I thought, no, I'm going to enjoy doing this. So I steamed into it, and he and I got on like a house on fire. And again, he taught me great things like how to draw in front of people and how to be confident when you're drawing, and always to talk up your work, not talk it down and just say, oh, I just did this and I just did that. So he kind of taught me a shorthand of how to communicate on paper with people in a very sort of straight, firm, but confident fashion. And he said, if you can draw better than most people, you'll always have their confidence, particularly when you're talking to directors and things like that, because they'll think, well, this guy can communicate on paper, so he knows what he's doing. So I kind of practiced that. And then when that finished, I went off. He said, why don't you go to Kingston, where there's a good friend of mine, Maura Tate, who teaches the course there. And I went to Kingston and did my postgrad there. And then essentially that was being taught by tutors who were sort of coming into the college teaching every day. They were real designers who were working at the time. And people like Stuart Craig and, various other film designers, and then lots of TV designers as well. And again, I could draft by then, and I was drawing all the time and making models and doing so much. But the film industry was dead at the time. This was 30 years ago. So I sort of was being taught by a guy called Quentin Chases, who was a prolific TV designer. He was always doing 7 shows a week on different things. And he said, what are you doing next? And I said, well, I don't know. And he said, well, start with me on Monday. So wow. I finished on the Friday and started on the Monday and haven't looked back. And he was the most amazing guy, because he clearly had faith in me. And he'd say, draw this setup, take the drawings up to Manchester, to Granada, and get the set built, and we'll see you on the night. And that was it.
So what was it you're doing? What were you doing on the Monday?
Well, it was designing sets for a sitcom. And, a really interesting story that came out of it. A sitcom, you would remember, I know, Roger, you started out at Granada, but situation comedies at the time. And this was a sitcom called Up the Garden Path with Imelda Staunton and various other sort of younger people at the time. And they had a guest set in the middle, which had always been designed, and then another set to the left. And there was always a new set every week. And one of the sets that week was a pottery class for ceramics, teaching in a school. And she was like a pottery teacher. And Quentin said, you did ceramics, didn't you? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, you designed that set. So I designed this set, and it wasn't very big. It was probably about 4 meters by 5 meters. And he said, you take care of it and we'll see you on the night. So, of course, being up in Manchester, I wasn't that far from Preston in Lancashire. So I hired a van, and I got in touch with my old ceramics tutor and said, look, I'm designing a set for Granada Television for a TV series. It's the summer. Can I borrow some of your equipment? And she said, yeah, come in, definitely. Come and load up the van and take what you need. So I took all the pottery, ceramics, and test drawings for the kids, and ceramics wheels and slip buckets and all the things that you need for ceramics, and dressed this set. And the director was a chap called David Askey, who was very particular about everything. Everything had to be on its marks, because it was pedestal cameras, and it all had to go well on the night with a live audience. And he sort of went through the main set, and he went to his second set, and then he came up to my set and looked up, and he was just, oh my God. He said, Quentin, who's the designer, was there at the time. He said, this is amazing. He said, it's incredible. Well done. And Quentin, to his credit, said, it wasn't me, David. He said, it was that young man over there. He said, it was Chris. He's designed it.
Aww.
And he just let me have the credit for it. And David turned around to me. He said, honestly, mate, he said, it's far more than we need, but it's absolutely brilliant. Well done.
Nice.
And do you know what? It kind of just lit me up. I thought, I can do this. This is something I'm going to enjoy doing. So it kind of set me off, really. And, the guy just threw me in the deep end for the next 2 years, just doing everything, And to be honest, I've never looked back, and he did me an enormous favor. I'm not sure you'd want to do that these days, but he did me so many favors by literally making me sweat with fear about going to sets and managing the things on my own. And he did it regularly. And, years later, when we were laughing and joking about it, he said, what do you want out of life? And I said, Quentin, the thing I want most out of life is to have you as my assistant. And he just laughed sort of in his sort of inimitable way and said, I always knew you could do it. He said, I wouldn't have asked you to do it if you didn't. So, he, that's been the sort of shape of my career, really, where I've always just jumped in with both feet and managed it and got on, and I suppose my dad being a people person and me being creative and learning from different mentors how to draw and how to communicate. And of course, it was long before computers and Photoshop and SketchUp and all of the different mediums that we use these days. So I was doing graphics and, drawing up sets, making all the models, managing schedules, and then working with budgets, and then also, working with construction managers who I've had a long relationship with 2 or 3 construction managers. But no, honestly, I've had a blast, and it was all of that. That's how it started. So that's my story into the industry.
Can you tell us what the responsibilities of an art director is versus a production designer and how they meld together?
Well, I suppose for me, the lines have always been blurred, because when you work in television, it's a slightly different way of working, because as an art director, or as what they call an assistant designer in those days, you were drawing up the sets, taking the designs, drawing the sets up, doing all the legwork and managing it. And I think by the age of 26, I got a phone call to do a feature film, and it was by someone I hadn't worked with before, but they'd heard from me through a friend of a friend. And I did my first feature, which was The Englishman that went up a hill and came down a mountain, which was a really sweet Welsh film with an unheard person in it called Hugh Grant. And he'd just done 4 Weddings, and it was before 4 Weddings was out. So that was his next project. And Ian McNeice, who was a great actor. And we did this sort of true story about how to, a hill that was in Wales at the turn of the sort of First World War, 1917, 1918, that had been registered as a hill and not a mountain, and it was only a few feet short. So the vicar of the time, the Welsh sort of pastor, decided that wasn't good enough and needed to top the mountain up. So it was a true story. So they topped the mountain up by about 10, 15 meters and had it re-measured, and it turned into a hill. And it was a really great story. But there was an interesting story off the back of that as well, because again, I was doing everything. Charles is a lovely man, designer, but not necessarily practical. I mean, he wasn't a practical guy, but he left that side of things to me. Of course, I was learning how to schedule and do all those things. And we had a production meeting one day, and of course, when you get your one line, everything's so compressed and tight as to how we're going to do all of these different scenes across the day, and the light failing and all the rest of it. And I'd already plotted that you couldn't top the mountain up by 10 meters or by 5 meters and then top it up by 10 meters in the same day, because the volume of earth would have been enormous, And I had the use of a Welsh farmer who owned the land, and we'd sort of sat down and worked it out, and I'd come up with this kind of clever scheme as to how we might shoot 2 moments of the same hill but different heights in the same day. And essentially what I'd done is put the big mound in front of the small mound. And as long as we were on the blind side of the big mound, we could shoot the small mound and then come back and shoot the big mound with the small mound hidden behind it. So you could almost get a 2 for 1, And all I needed to do then was put a white flagpole in with this at different height measurements, and put it in the top. And sometimes it would say 12 meters, and other times it would say 20 meters, So I sort of worked it out, and we had this one-line meeting, and we were all sitting down there and working out how we're going to do it. And it dawned on everybody. I said, well, how are we going to do it? And I said, well, what about if we do this? What about if we do a big mountain and a small mountain? I said, and we put like a cut-off flagpole in the top of one and another one in the top of another. And we dress this one with all the sort of ramps and planking and timbers that need to make it look like it's a sort of First World War trenches. And they said, that's a brilliant idea, but that's tomorrow. So how are you going to do it? And I said, well, thankfully, I did it yesterday. So so they were like, oh, well, that's a good job then. So again, it was just one of those situations where I really learned how to think ahead of a production, because, it's not their job to think about it, but it's our job to work it out and make it easy and make the movie happen. And, I worked that out very, very quickly. And I suppose what an art director does is that for the designer is not just look at how things need to look visually and from a storytelling point of view, but there's the logistics, and sometimes the logistics even on small films can be really complex, quite often because you've got an artist that needs to come in on a certain day, so you're going to be shooting out of sequence. So there's all sorts of crazy, silly logistics that have got to be worked out, but you don't have a choice. So therefore, how are you going to do it, Chris? And I've probably found that I've always been quite good at that. And then equally, I've always had a fantastic team of construction managers and practical people around me. Even groundsmen and greensmen and people like that, because they're the salt of the earth. Those guys, they dig holes and plant things and carry things up mountains. And at the end of the day, those are the people you need as your best friends when you're doing these kind of projects. So yeah, art directing is supporting your designer, but also solving lots of problems for them. And it's interesting, Quentin, I was early on in my career, so I was working with Quentin, we were going to ITN, and I was fretting about where to park the car because it was a grazing road in London, it was busy and whatever, and I could see he sort of just got out of the car, leaned in the car and said, "Look, I pay you to be my fucking assistant. Now park the car and I'll see you in there," and slam the door. And I sort of went, actually, there's two things I could do here. I could drive off and never see him again, or I could just realize that I am actually paid to be his assistant, and I ought to park the car and go in there and think ahead a bit more. And that's what I did. And it paid off, and it's true. I mean, you perhaps wouldn't say that to someone these days, but I was brought up short on a few lessons, and it sort of knocked me into shape and made me realize that, at the end of the day, you're paid as an assistant to help and make people's lives easier because they have a much bigger picture and a much bigger kind of responsibility. And I've always known that, and I've always recognized that. And, I've always supported my art directors and my assistants and my designers as much as I possibly can, And sure enough, what happens when you do that? They ask you back, and that's the best thanks you can ever get from anyone, So yeah, it's that's the difference between an art director and a designer. A designer very much takes care of the story and liaises with the director and the DP and everybody, and they don't necessarily need to be bogged down by the logistics, whereas an art director needs to have a hand in both. And as a supervisor, I always had a creative hand. I've worked with some amazing designers, as you know, and they've all taught me a lot. And in return, I've always supported them a lot. And, I'm still friends with every single one of those designers.
And when you do a small film, there can be only one art director oftentimes on a smaller film. But on bigger films, there's a number of art directors. And how do you work that way with a number of people? How do you divide it? Do you ever overlap? How does that work?
I think a lot of it depends on the scale of the project, the budget, and then also, the countries you're in. I mean, if you're shooting in 4 or 5 countries and, 7, 8, 9, 10 stages at Pinewood, as was often the case, what you find are some amazing people. And I was very, very lucky early on to catch up with quite a few art directors who have been lifelong friends and lifelong supporters, and, to name them here, Andrew Bennett, Neil Kello, Mark Harris, Sandra Phillips, all of those, Dean Clegg, they're all designing now or supervising or art directing with me. And they're all brilliant at all different things. I could always drop Neil into another country and he would just get on with it and do it after the brief and would pick it up, and Mark would always do an incredibly technical interior of a plane, and Andrew would do an amazing street, and, Sandra would do all the stuff in between and other great sets and all the rest of it. So, and I've always employed not the same people, because I actually, strangely enough, enjoy when people are not available, because it means I can meet someone new. So it doesn't always have to be the same loyal team. And I've always, certainly over the last few years since I stepped up to designing, I encouraged them all to just go and be supervisors and be designers, and because we can't stay at this level forever, in terms of art directing, and it's not fair. So yeah, I've always surrounded myself with really talented, amazingly wonderful people, and they all are. They're all incredibly talented. Over at Tim Browning are with me at the minute, Kim Frederickson with me at the minute, Greg Fanjo, Adam Brockbank. They're all fantastic concept designers, and more often than not, you'll ask them to do something and they don't just do it, they do it 5 times better than you could have ever imagined, But what I always do is always give them a sketch. I always sketch, I can draw, and I can draw very quickly and very illustratively. So I'll always sketch out what I think I need and then put lots of photographic references with it, sit down with them or Zoom them or send them something, and they'll put something together and model it up and send something back and say, well, like this. And they say, yeah, but let's tweak that, or let's desaturate it a bit or crop it a little bit. And then I'll sketch over the top and send it back. And they respond really well to that because they can see that you sort of have a very good idea of what you want, which quite often some designers don't really communicate that well. That doesn't mean to say that they're not good. It just means that they have different strengths. And quite often you can be, particularly on some of the bigger films, the big studio films, it can be designed by committee because the studio has such a large say in what they want their sort of their canon of work to look like. For instance, Star Wars. You've got Doug Chiang at the helm up there, who's a genius. He's a great guy, and of course, each movie has to have a certain sort of autograph to its look. And so therefore, if you buy into those films, you have to sort of design those kind of movies, really. And if some people take to it like a duck to water, and other people don't enjoy it. But yeah, whatever it is, it's usually big, it's usually fun, it's usually exciting, and it involves putting people all over the world and working out the logistics. But I always choose people to do the job that plays to their strengths so that they enjoy doing it. So
that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, you want to wake up and enjoy your day's work, and I want to do that with the people that I work with as well. You want them to enjoy it, or I do.
And does it help you to know how the scene's going to be lit? Do you want to know that before?
Very much so.
Tell us why.
I mean, early on, I was still learning, my craft of how you build sets, but, very quickly learned that it's important to sit down with your DOP and your director to work out, yes, it needs a door here, and then it needs the table over there, and it needs the windows here, and how we're going to key light this, and which wall is going to float or whatever. So, and sitting down and developing a really good working relationship with your director of photography has always been crucial. And I know, Roger, when you and I did Skyfall together, you spent a lot of time in the art department, and you light things in a very sparse way. You always light with practicals, and it always makes things kind of so real. Yes, of course there are other lights there, but it feels like it's lit with practicals. And so we'd spend a lot of time talking about what kind of practicals we want in the set and what the sort of color temperature is. And, invariably we'd end up taking them apart and putting other, lights in there, which are far more controllable from your perspective. But yeah, I mean, a working relationship with a DP is absolutely crucial. And, the project I'm on, I'm working with Bill Pope, and he's delightful. Just did a project with Bob Ellsworth, and he's another, master of photography. So again, as well as working with great designers, I've worked with some fantastic directors, Sam and Tim Burton and George Clooney, and all of those people. They're all really good at what they do, but do you know what they all do as well? They all employ fantastic DOPs. And because you guys frame it up so well and lens it up so well and light it so well, and without that, we're all doomed. You guys make our sets look amazing, and you make the artists look amazing. And, you guys have got a long track record of that. And I think that's probably why you've got brass statuettes and you're so well thought of.
Did you specialize as an art director at all? I mean, I remember that one set, which was the sort of glass office set in Skyfall, that actually I remember talking with Dennis Gassner about very, very early on, because originally that was scheduled to shoot in Shanghai.
That's right,
on the 40th floor of some silly office building. And I said, well, that's ridiculous. But I distinctly remember you were the one that we all went to see if we could use the concept of these glass walls and build the set on the old 007 stage. But was that just went to you because by chance, or did you concentrate on that kind of, that working out the construction details as well as the design details?
Well, there's a few different kind of answers to that, but I mean, I've been in, by the time you get to do the kind of movies that you're talking about, Skyfall, they've got sizable budgets, but I've always, and, in my new career now of designing movies, and I've used this quote a few times across my career, but particularly now, is I always see making a movie like building a Jenga tower. You build what we shouldn't be doing in the early days is talking about budgets and schedules and all the rest of it. There's clearly, if it's snowing, you want to be shooting in winter. If it's broad sunshine, you need to be shooting in the summer. So there are obvious tropes that you've got to apply to a schedule to say, let's do this then, and then we're not fighting the elements. But equally, you build the movie until it's towering high and it's the size that you need it to be. But then invariably, once you start costing it, you can't afford all of those things. So then you've got to start taking bricks out and saying, how do we take out all of these different bricks without the movie collapsing? So that's the sort of best analogy. And I've always looked at it like that. And I've always worked with Steve Bowen, our construction manager, and we've always looked at how we would eliminate all the different sort of fat out of the build so that it can be the most efficient thing. But, when you talk about Skyfall, I distinctly remember we went to China 2 or 3 times and we scouted China, and we not only looked at skyscrapers, but we looked at the dead city. And there was a place 20, 30 kilometers out of town that we went to look at, which was an old film set that had been used for a major film in years gone by. But it was tatty and it was falling apart and it needed a lot of work. And then we wanted to do the casino there and all of those different things that we needed to do. And, I went along and you listen and you listen and you listen and you take notes and you don't say anything. You just absorb it all and say, this is the film that Sam wants to make. This is the film that Dennis is designing. Now how are we going to achieve it? And I'd go there with Steve Bowen and art directors and we'd talk about it and all the rest of it. But invariably you come back and you cost out the whole movie. And, in the Bond's case, Barbara and Michael would say to you, okay, guys, how much is it going to cost? And, it's going to be $8 million or £8 million or whatever it was going to be at the time. And then they'd get the other costs in from China. And of course, it was like $13 million, just to go and shoot there. And it was just, I distinctly remember Barbara calling me into Andrew Noakes' office and saying, we might have a bit of a problem here. I don't think we can afford to go to China. What would it cost to build it? And of course, it was, if we did the Dead City here, then we could put, $1.5 million to that, and we could do this to this, and we could do that to that. And I reckon with some change, probably do it all for 4 million. And it was just like, well, that's a lot better than 13, and that's where you start. That's when you start clawing it back. And of course, what you get then is the advantage that the designer can design the movie that he wants to do, and rather than patching up, an old set in Shanghai somewhere. And it was the same with the glass. It was a great moment. It was a fantastic scene to play, but we could really set the glass and we could really set the neons and we could really set the building opposite where the assassination was going to take place, all on a vast soundstage, 2 camera with exactly the right kind of video screens that were running up these incredible sort of jellyfish and whatever, and create this amazing scene to camera, which we would never have been able to do in Shanghai. But by going to Shanghai...
especially on the 47th floor of a tower block. I mean, I remember scouting it by myself and standing there and going, what the hell? Who did this to me? But then I think one of the final kind of nails in the coffin to shooting in Shanghai was actually, we went there on a tech scout even. We got as far as a tech scout. And I remember standing in the old casino, which was a set that we were going to reuse. And a typhoon had gone through and blown half of it away. Do you remember that? So there was suddenly, the figures just did not make sense.
No. And it's funny, because I've done that a few times now, and you only get to it with a certain amount of experience and working with the right teams. And as I say, Steve is a master of halving something and halving it again. But, we had the same on Star Wars. Star Wars 8, it was bigger than anything I'd done, and we were shooting in 3 or 4 countries, and we had 12 stages, and there were turnarounds on every stage, and Rick Heinrichs was the designer, who's the most beautiful man. And we had an awful lot to do. And we said, right, okay, well, we're going to go out to Iceland and we're going to go to this location. And we went to Iceland, we landed. We took an hour's journey to this fjord, and then we drove down this road for 10 miles and across a dirt track, and we got to this fjord, this sort of stream, and we parked the vans and we got out and we walked across the stream and we walked for another 10 minutes, and we finally stood at the foot of the most stunning Icelandic mountain you've ever seen. Then they said, we want to park the Millennium Falcon here, and we want to put the Tree of Life up there, and we want, Yoda to come out from underneath halfway up the mountain. And Steve and I looked at each other and thought, well, that's going to be interesting, because it's summer now, so that means we're going to be building in the winter, and we've just spent an hour and a half getting here on 4-wheel drive vehicles. How are we going to get a Millennium Falcon here, you know? And so we sort of absorbed it, and we built the Jenga Tower, and we built the movie, and then we said, how much is it going to cost? And we said, well, it's 40 articulated trucks just to get the Millennium Falcon there, you know? And they were like, what? How much is that going to cost? And it was just like, well, lick your finger, and it's going to be like, you know, $13 million or something of that nature. And they were like, well, Christ, we can't afford that. And they said, or we could take the tank tracks at Longcross, and we could build the mountain up Longcross and park the Millennium Falcon at the bottom on wheels, so that when it takes off, we can just wheel it out of the way, and you can have Yoda at the bottom underneath everything, and we can serve it with all the gas lines, service the flames of this fire, this tree, with all the gas lines from the top of the sort of tank tracks. And they said, well, how much is that going to cost? And I said, well, you know, 3.5 million perhaps. And they went, done. So therefore, you know, what you do is you allow people to, you know, in this case, Rick and Ryan and Ram, to build this incredible movie, you know, but then you say, okay, well, now I know what you want, then how can we achieve it? You know, and you bring it back, you carefully bring it back down to earth, and you land it, and you make it doable for everybody, not just to film, but doable for grips, doable for lighting, doable for effects and special effects, you know, and everyone gets to go home at night, and then we're not paying for per diems and hotels and flights. And all of that for me is a sin, because, you know, whilst it's wonderful to go abroad, you know, it's another thing. It's money that's not spent on the film. You know, you don't see it. It's just basically supporting a whole bunch of crew to go somewhere and try and make it happen, you know. So it's always nice to sort of breathe an element of logic back into it, but still get the movie that they've all set out to do. So, and that's creative in itself.
When you're starting with a director as a production designer, do you have some sort of tricks in trying to get him or her to give you what they're thinking about? Because that's the hardest part. Sometimes you need to draw it out from them right before you can go forward.
They're all very different, you know, and you know, I think the thing we all know about directors is they all communicate at different levels, but they're all super bright, super intelligent, and they're all super wedged with the million things going on, not just design, but lighting and costume and music and casting and this and that, so that you've only got them for a matter of seconds in a day, because they're so busy with everything, and you have to respect that. So every time you see a director, he or she, you've got to put something in front of them that is really relevant, and you're not wasting their time, you know. And one thing I found sort of very, very valuable, again, and, you know, it's not so much being able to draw, but it's being able to think logically. And I've done 2 or 3 films in recent years where I've sat down with an A2 piece of paper and sketched out the shape of the film. And by that, I'm saying, well, okay, well, you go through these gates and you head into this tunnel and you come out through this and you go into the mountain and you go out, and then there's a big fight in the airbase and whatever. And then they come out of here and the whole thing gets destroyed and then they fly off. And by sketching that out as a map, you know, I brought the director in on day one of my time on this particular project. And I said, I think this is your movie. And I just took her through it. And she went, oh my God, Chris. She said, I've been asking for this for weeks. She said, I thought I was going crazy, you know? And she said, it's great. Just get on with it. Turned on her heels and walked out. And to be honest, that's the trick. The trick is very quickly. I've always had this analogy of getting hold of a Blamatoris, you know, getting hold of this ball and getting it down on the ground as quickly as possible, because otherwise you're just going to spend all day chasing it around the ring, you know. And making films is the same. You really do have to sort of go to where the problem is, get hold of the horns very quickly, get it down on the ground. And then basically, once you've got control of a situation, then you can very carefully start laying out your stall around it. So I've always thought in that kind of, you know, that very efficient way of how do I communicate the biggest possible idea as quickly as possible? And more often than not, it's a pen and a piece of paper, you know. And I've just done it on this. I'm just doing How to Train Your Dragon with Dean. And I know you were involved in Train Your Dragon, the animations. Dean, again, thinks in the same kind of logic, really. You just map it out, really, and make sense out of everything. And once you've done that, you sort of, it's a case of breaking it up into individual chapters then and making sense out of it. So communication is everything. And then employing concept artists and art directors who you trust to take those bite-sized pieces to sort of, manage those elements while you keep looking at the bigger picture and telling the story.
And I think it's also that you have to really quickly find out how they think, because sometimes they'll say, I want this really large room, and then you show them something and they went, well, not that large. Their concept of large might be different than yours. So every time you start with someone new, you have to create your own language.
Yeah.
Right.
And you'll have been, we were all on the same films. Markouts, another thing, because it's you can show all the pictures you want in the world. You can show all the concepts. You can show all the scale models, a 1/4 inch or 1 inch to a foot or whatever scale you want to do it at. But it's much better to take the director and you guys and anyone, the first AD and your art directors, down onto a stage, preferably the stage you're going to shoot on. Take the set out and just say, this is how big it is, because quite often they'll go, oh, no, it's too big, even though they've been looking at all of your concepts and all of your plans and all of your models and saying, yes, that's great, Chris. What if we walk the wall in 8 feet? So you walk it in, you say the bed will be here and the windows are there and the key light's through here and that's where they'll leave, and it's really useful because, not only is a space architectural, but it's an emotional thing, Quite often you might want to walk down a tunnel and open up, boom, into a big space, or you might want to do the reverse where you're in this enormous hangar and then you have an intense scene in a prison cell that's just off the side, So suddenly you're changing the emotion of the story and allowing things to breathe or not breathe. And that's really important to directors and DPs and actors. Everybody needs to feel like they're in a space that befits the script. And I think that, again, using the bull by the horns analogy, if you don't do that early on, you can be chasing it forever. You can be doing a set that's wrong and then adjusting it. And, if you're adjusting sets that are wrong, then you're wasting money, So you need to be doing that with 4 strips of masking tape on the floor and saying, how do you feel about it? So there is a very simple logic to it. And I think if you can get all of those things in place, by the time you get to shooting the film, it's so complicated with all of the different departments all needing their sort of, their requirements of what you do with the set, that by then the set is already designed, built, and I've moved on, really. But, once you hand it over to a film crew, it's no longer yours, it's theirs, and you do have to step away from it, and either watch them spoil it or watch them turning into something amazing.
It must be, every director is very different. Some directors know exactly what they want in terms of the shots and the set, like Joel and Ethan Cohen. And I've seen them get annoyed when a set has been built in 4 walls when they only wanted 2. And they feel that it's a total waste of money, and they're so cautious with their budgets.
But you have other directors. Will say, I only need 2 walls, and you get on the set, and they go, how come I can't shoot this?
Who don't work out their shots before the day of the shoot, really, with the actors. They want a space and a cinematographer, like Cesar on Constant Gardener and working with Fernando Melendez. They're very fluid way of working. So how do you judge that? You have to understand that, presumably, before you're even designing the set.
There's nothing, as I say, having worked with Fernando and Cesar, who's an absolute star of a man. Some directors, tends to be a lot of the younger ones, are thinking digitally and not necessarily thinking in the traditional film craft sense of the word. Because I used to do lots of commercials and things like that, we'd only ever build 2 walls, or we'd build a doorway with another doorway beyond and then a backing flat beyond that. And we'd just be 1 or 2 shots. And you knew full well that there was nothing left or right, but you were standing in a corridor of rooms that was 60, 80 feet deep, and there was light coming in from all directions. And it just sells the idea that you're in this vast space when in actual fact you're looking through 3 different flats, and I love that. I was always been mad on glass paintings and, early days of industrial light and magic. And, that film craft has always been something really close to my heart, and model shots and things like that. But maybe that's my age. But yeah, directors that are used to doing, if you look at Constant Gardener, City of God, that was a great story as well, actually, because I'd gone on a wet Wednesday to see this film called City of God, and I came home and my wife said, what did you think of the film? I said, I think I've just found the reason for cinema, City of God. And then sometime after I was filming Bridget Jones in Thailand, and the phone rang. We were just wrapping, and it was the ever lovely Tracy Seward. And she said, "Hi, honey, it's Tracy." She said, "I'm doing this project called The Constant Gardener." And she said, would you fancy coming and helping the production designer out? And of course, it was Mark Tilsley. And I said, yeah. I said, "Who's directing it?" And she said, "It's Fernando Morales." I went, "I'll do it."
Yeah.
So I didn't even ask where, what, where, how much. I was just like, I'm going to do that movie. And true to form, we had a fantastic time doing it. And again, he's a very efficient, he's just super clean the way he shoots his films, And, when we were in Nairobi, sort of all, either going to the Norfolk Hotel for a drink at the end of the night, he was going out with Cesar, shooting with a little minima camera, walking around the slums of Nairobi, getting just general GVs, So they were a team, those two, and they still are a team, I know when they did the 2 Popes, I went to see Mark because I was just about to do No Time to Die with Mark, and he was out there doing the 2 Popes and met up with Fernando and Cesar again. And they're still, they're still the same, they're just a tight little team of creative life and energy, and sweet people. And I don't know whether it counts for a lot or not really, but I really like working with lovely people, people who are very good at what they do.
Counts for a lot.
Yeah, I kind of, it means a lot to me to work, Dean, the director I'm working with at the minute, is just a genuine human being. You guys are genuine human beings, Mark Tilsley is a genuine human being. And it means a lot to me to work with those kind of people, because I want to turn up to work and I want an enthusiasm for the day and I want to enjoy it and I want to be a part of a team. It isn't the Chris Lowe show, and nor is it, and I'll say it, nor is it the Sam Mendes show or the Mark Tilsley show. It's everybody's show. We're all pulling together for that period of time. And I do love it when we're all collaborating, and working together. So yeah, I really value working with people who appreciate each other and allow each other to breathe creatively within the confines of the film,
And do you prefer locations or sets when you are starting to design something? Does your mind go towards looking for locations, or do you sometimes think this would be much better as a set?
I think the answer to that has to be somewhere in the middle of both, really. Depends the script, put it this way, if it was The Constant Gardener, 95, probably 99.9% of that was all shot on location, and so much the better for it. When you do, the Shanghai Tower, that has to be a set, really, just because you're trying to create such a complex series of images and color and composition, fight scenes and whatever, that to take over a skyscraper 47 floors up would just be dead in the water, So, when I read a script, I'm always just thinking location, set, location, set, and it sort of automatically comes to you, but then, for instance, the first time I stepped up to designing, I was actually it was COVID, and Dennis Gassner rang me. He was doing a Netflix show for the Russo brothers called The Grey Man, and he said, "I can't come over because of COVID. Do you fancy doing all the European side?" And I said, "No, absolutely. I'd love to, So I got this gig to basically go and design everything abroad that wasn't in America. And at the time, there were 7 different countries. Of course, because of COVID, it ended up being sliced down more and more. And they sent me to Bangkok to sort of recce and scout locations. And I said, "Look, I'll go, provided if you're going to lock me up for 2 weeks in quarantine, that you do come out and we do film?" And they said, yes, we're definitely going to come. And of course, they locked me up in a hotel for 2 weeks. And on about day 11, they said, "Chris, come home because we're not coming to Bangkok." And I was like, it's like, okay. So they said, "We'd like you to do Bangkok in Prague." I was like,
of course. What's wrong with that?
I mean, you know what it's like. You walk around Prague, you can see Bangkok everywhere, can't you?
Everywhere.
So I said, "Well, I'm not going to come home. I'm going to stay on for a week, and I'm going to find all the locations in Bangkok, and then I'm going to come back to Prague, and I'm going to see if I can match them." And that's what I did.
Right.
And, you know, thankfully, some of the stuff we were shooting was underpasses and markets and things like that, you know. So we found underpasses in Prague, and we'd drop in a plane to Bangkok, and there you were in amongst it. So, you know, and then there was this other big sequence where there was this kind of water party going on, water celebration. And we found this really boring, very symmetrical bunch of office blocks. But I'd seen, when I was in Bangkok, these massive projectors projecting dragons on the walls in the center of Bangkok, and it looked really cool. And I thought, well, what if we did that? You know, what if we look down the middle of this very symmetrical, boring office block, and just project dragons across all of the walls and put the party down the middle and park the entrance at the end, you know. And they loved it, and we did that, and we had huge projectors on each roof, and it was all being tiled together. And of course, you'd get these dragons that were swirling and swinging and swaying and moving all over the building. And of course, it completely stole the show and made it look like Bangkok, even though we were in the most dull kind of out of town office block, you know. So quite often a location will very much dictate what your set needs to look like, you know, particularly if you're in a situation where you have to come away from there and do it somewhere else, you know.
But aren't sometimes locations requiring sort of a compromise? In other words, in your head, you have this idea, the door should be there, the kitchen should be over there, and it would be great. And then you go to a location that's pretty much great for everything except for a few things. But if you built the set, you would have done it the way that you have it in your head. So when is the compromise better than building a set?
Well, I mean, an interesting one was I did a feature called Into the Woods with Rob Marshall, and that was a musical, and that really couldn't have been done anywhere other than a set, even though we were in the woods, even though we were in the butcher shop. And the reason for that is, you know, Rob Marshall, who's an amazing director. I've never worked with anyone that worked so hard and so diligently. You know, he would literally time out the music. So you would go da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, door handle. Had to be there. Literally, it wasn't the size of the set, it was the length and duration of the beats of the music that dictated where the door handle had to be. So those kind of situations, when you're designing for musicals and whatever, you kind of have to do them as a set. Now, saying that, the other flip side of that coin, and when we did Spectre, we went with Dennis and we all ended up in Mexico, and he just announced one day that this whole sequence was going to be done as a one-er. And if you like, this was the precursor to 1917, which I know you guys did. And so we did this whole run through where you'd walk down the street and past all these dancers and whatever, and then in through and up the lift, and then through a lift, and then into a room and out onto a balcony and across a roof and down, and then the rifle shot, and then the building would explode. And I was like, how on earth are we going to do that? But what we did is we walked the location, but then we very cleverly did a series of wipes onto set pieces that were either built onto the roof, and then we put certain things in place so Daniel could walk, you know, almost unaided, not really on a wire at all, you know, across and leap across things and get to where we want. So we took a whole series of complex locations with thousands of extras, dancers and all the rest of it going into a hotel. But we did one or two very clever little wipes here and there just to sort of get us through moments that you couldn't get the camera into the space or whatever. We augmented an entire, what must have been like literally a mile long of locations, all interconnected. And, you know, when you looked up to the actual location, you could see we'd built a piece of set sort of wall with a balcony on the roof of another building where they'd step out and walk along the parapet edge and get to the final resting point where they'd sort of take the shot. So, you know, locations versus set, or somewhere in between. That's, but that's the joy of what we do. I mean, what other industry gets to do that? My kids used to say to me, "What have you done today, Dad?" And I did one of the last films I'd supervised was Dumbo with Tim Burton. And we spent a whole day looking at how on earth we were going to do things like wash Dumbo when he didn't exist. So well, you put your sponge in the paddling pool, it's full of soap suds, but he's not there. So do we do that with a double? Do we do it with a blue polystyrene shape? Do we do it with an actor? So the whole movie that whole day was spent sitting around a table going through every time we had to interact with Dumbo, to work out just how on earth we're doing it. And in many ways, I'm doing the same on How to Train Your Dragon now. Is how do you get off a dragon that's not there? Is it a slide? Is it a saddle? Is it a buck? Is it a do we go on location? There's a possibility we might end up going to Dartmoor, and I've just got back from Greenland looking at icebergs and all the rest of it. Do we go there, or do we build a patch of ice, or there's 1,000 decisions to make before you've even started, as you well know. But I think that's the joy of it. And you get there by default. You get there by a democracy of creative people.
But how much has changed now? I mean, not just in the idea of previs and seeing a set and seeing actually a camera move through a whole complex set, like maybe the opening of Spectre, you could have looked at as a previs and studied the whole thing. But then how much more do you use as backgrounds? The idea of putting a small piece of the iceberg on stage instead of going to Greenland and just putting everything else in the background as a CG or an AI created background, for instance. I mean, that seems to be, during my time, for instance, I started off doing everything in camera, shooting on 1984, everything was in camera, projections, everything. But now you would never entertain it, doing it that way.
Again, I think it kind of a lot of it depends on the director and what he or she would like to shoot.
Right.
Then you've got the studio, how much they want to spend. Is it worth taking a unit to Greenland and shooting, a scene on the ice, with all of the logistics that involves? But more often than not, it's favorable to shoot in a controlled environment, particularly if it's anything of any scale. And then, what it's like now to put a unit on the road and to have them park up and to be there for more than a day. You could burn through $500,000, just like that if it's a unit of any scale. So there's always this preference to try and shoot things back at the studio. Also you can get there for a day's shoot and it can be raining, or the light could, the sun could never come from behind the clouds, and you end up with a disaster. So, I think big unit days traveling abroad are getting less and less. And it very much feels different, even since COVID, even since the writer's strike. The kind of films, I'm relatively fledgling on the designer front, certainly not on the art directing front, but even I can see that they just don't want to spend that much time prepping anymore. They don't really want to spend as much on sets. There's also, the waste side of things where they want to sort of, keep their sort of waste credentials as clean as possible. And I fully support that. So it is changing. It's changing a lot. And it's our job to be as creative as we can. And I know you briefly mentioned AI there. I'd be the first person to say, oh, no, AI, we shouldn't use it and all the rest of it. But to be honest, guys, it's not going to be down to us. It's going to be some young guys who will make an AI movie and someone else will pick it up and say, look at this is cool. And other people will make AI movies. It won't be Roger and James, Chris, and other people of our generation that are making those films. It'll be younger people coming through just doing it. So, we might want to resist it in terms of our own personal preferences and, trying to cling on to the craft of filmmaking. And I very, very much support that. But a bit like gaming, there was a time when we all thought, well, gaming's never really going to take off and whatever, but look at it now, it's bigger than the movie industry, and that's what happens. If you dare take your eye off modern technology, it will overtake you, so therefore you either embrace it or you allow it to overtake you. That's
And I think
where
you
we're at.
embrace it, don't you? Yeah,
Oh,
Yeah.
well,
for sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. But you embrace it within certain parameters, and there is a world where AI
Yeah.
can be helpful. I mean,
Mhm.
just even out there in the world, AI can probably find a cure for cancer much quicker than 2,000 scientists could ever do in 20 years. So
Mhm.
there is a
It,
place
it
for these
doesn't help
things.
you design a set right now.
No,
You don't use AI, for instance, to kind of help doing dragons
well,
flying and stuff.
it's interesting because I just did a thing called Ladies First for Netflix, and it was all about it was a comedy, and it was all about male roles being swapped. A guy bangs his head and wakes up in a female sort of world where it's run by women. So, and we went to this advertising agency, which was Sea Containers on Embankment, and now it's all part of J. Walter Thompson, a massive sort of multi-house advertising thing. And we were saying to them, what about AI? And this guy came up with a very interesting point, and he said AI only really can look backwards. It doesn't really look forwards. It will look back at everything that you've done and come up with something, but it's not really looking into the future, And he said, until it does, I think we've all still got half a chance of being in employment, And I thought it's true. I mean,
It's better than none, I suppose. Yeah.
yeah, better than none. But yeah, the industry is changing and has changed massively in my time and yours. But you have to
Yeah.
embrace it. And I mean, the main thing is, and I do know people like to be entertained. I do know people want to watch TV, and I do know people want to go to the movies. And as long as people want that, or read books, or read stories, or go to the theatre. So as long as people want that kind of escapism, I think most of us, and the most flexible of us, will survive.
Okay, I want to ask you. we love watching The Vicar of Dibley, and you worked on The Vicar of Dibley early on, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if people listening know The Vicar of Dibley, but it's a very, very funny show.
Season 1, episode 8.
It's particularly recommended. So what do you take from your experience? Right, good for you too. I mean, it's very funny, and it's still people are still enjoying it now. They're really. But what do you take from working on The Vicar of Dibley that you that continues with you working today with Deakins, for instance?
Okay. Well, you know what they say about the first rule of comedy, don't you? Timing.
Timing. There you go. Yeah.
No, I mean, you know what? When that came out, and I was working for a really great guy called Andrew Howe Davis. Again, he was an ex-BBC designer, and I'm still very, very good friends with him. And he used to do all of the Fast shows and Mr. Bean and Vicar of Dibley, and I was just one of 2 or 3 assistants that would go and help out and do things. And I got involved in Vicar of Dibley, particularly Christmas special, where Dawn has to sit in the chair and she gets stuck, and I was there with a hook, trying to sort of put on this sort of belt that she had, where you'd sit down and click into this hook, and then she could stand up and take her arms off the carver chair to say she was stuck. And Dawn is an absolute sport. She is such a sweet lady, and again, the writers, Richard Curtis and the other writer whose name has escaped me, and I'm terribly embarrassed to say that. They would be writing. I mean, one of the happiest memories I've ever had is going to like the BBC rehearsal rooms and sitting there with all of those characters, Dawn French, and every single one, and they were all brilliantly funny, and they'd worked out who they were and their characters and their comedy timing. So we would sit there, and the director would do a read through, and we'd all be in stitches on the floor. Just laughing all day long at the humor and the jokes. And then somebody would be saying, well, what if I said this? And then someone would top it, well, what if I said that? And then Richard Curtis would come in with something else, and they'd change a line. And then all of a sudden they'd need a Bible that said something on, we'll need it for tomorrow night. So you'd be dashing out to get the graphics changed on the Bible, and now we need, I did Mr. Bean. Now we need a turkey that he can put on his head and he'll lose his watch when he's trying to get it off, and so I really enjoyed my time in television, and I learned such a lot. And even one of the things was pulling sets out of skips. So I was only saying to somebody the other day, I was lucky to be involved in a project called Longitude, which was Charles Sturridge directing. It was all about how they find the longitude, and an amazing story by Darvel Sobel. And I got a call out of the blue from a lady called Eileen Diss, and she was a brilliant theatre designer, did a lot for Harold Pinter. multi-BAFTA award winning. And she rang me, and she must have been in the 70s at the time, and said, Chris, she said, I've heard that you've done a galleon ship before. She said, I need some help. Would you come and do this project with me? So I went to see her and read the script and was like, I have to do this. It's amazing. So we did this project, and we spent a lot of money, and it was like a flagship Granada TV show. And I was art director and she was production designer. And we built all the clocks and we built all the ships, and she didn't really do clocks and ships. So she said, darling, you do that and I'll do everything else. And I had a blast doing galleon ships and all the things that you do with that period. And what's his name? At the end, they'd written in a new scene, and it was a Jamaican inn, and there was no money for it. And Charles said, what are we going to do? And I said, well, we're destroying the man of war deck. Why don't we build the Jamaican inn out of the man of war pieces, And so we did. We took all the knees of the man of war, and we got rid of the cannons, and we put these pieces together. And by juxtaposing all of this set together and just lighting it with candlelight here and there, and putting some barrels and had people drinking, and then there were obviously all the sort of Jamaican women there and whatever, the whole thing. And honestly, out of all the sets we did, I felt like it was one of the best sets we'd ever done, just because it was made up out of all the pieces of the rest of the film. And there was something emotionally quite beautiful about that, And, the great sort of coda to the end of that story was we got to the end of the movie and I'd thoroughly enjoyed it. And Eileen said, Chris, would you consider being called co-designer with this, because I'm so happy with everything that you've done? And I said, no, I'd be delighted to be co-designer for you. And so they gave me the credit and whatever. And then, of course, it won 8 BAFTAs, and I won one of them. And shared a BAFTA with Eileen. And bless her, Eileen passed away about 12 months ago. And she was the most talented, beautiful, intelligent, smart, creative individual I think I've ever come across. She was just the tour de force of energy and creativity. So I feel blessed to have worked with hundreds of people, and I very much include you both in this equation. Working with Sam Mendes, working with Tim Burton, working with you guys and Mark Tilsley and Fernando Morales and Cesar, and I've had a blast. And the only reason I stepped up is so many people were saying, why don't you go and design? And I thought, what, I'm going to be a really grumpy supervising art director if I don't get my finger out and have a go.
Right.
Right. I never remember you as being grumpy. You were fine. But you do talk with such enthusiasm about the Vicar of Dibley.
Yeah.
I love that.
It'll probably be my grave. Yes. Yeah. All the other ones, but Vicar of Dibley first. Yeah. So,
yeah.
I should. People often say, "What's your favorite project?" I should say just Vicar of Dibley, really, shouldn't I? Yeah.
The breaking chair.
Yeah.
I mean, it was such a funny scene. It's a silly little thing, but I mean, it works. I mean, I don't know. It's a challenge, like putting Millennium Falcon at the top of a glacier. I mean, what the
hell? Everything we do is a challenge. Everything, but it's what a great challenge to get paid for. It's it's so
great.
One's amazingly lucky.
Yeah, no regrets.
Well, great.
No regrets.
Oh, great. Chris, thank you so much. All right, my friends.
Well, thank you so much.
So lovely to talk to you both.
Take care of yourself.
Yeah, take care.
If you'd like to sponsor the Team Deakins podcast, let us know at pod@teamdeakins.com. Thanks for listening. If you want more information and further discussion, check out the forums at www.rogerdeakins.com. Becoming a member is free, and you can ask follow-up questions there. And be sure to subscribe to the podcast for more new questions and topics. Also, check us out on Instagram at team.deakins. See you next time.